A while back, I did a video on the rather spiffy remake of Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap. The original Master System game was one of my favourites, and the remake was a highly enjoyable adaptation with excellent artwork. Now, the same people who brought us that enhanced version of a venerable Sega classic are poised to release another game based on a franchise that had its heyday in the early to mid-90s. But this time, it's not a remake, it's a full-blown sequel, one that the world's been waiting for over 25 years. I'm talking, of course, about Streets of Rage 4, due to release in less than a week at time of writing. The artwork is instantly recognisable as coming from the same people who created the Wonder Boy remake, despite the rather significant difference in tone and setting. It looks fantastic, and it seems like the game will be filled with loving tributes to the Mega Drive series, from unlockable pixel art characters to remixed and original music. Long-term fans of the series are understandably excited. Would I classify myself as a long-term fan of the series? Well, kind of. I owned a copy of the first game in this series, but back in those days it was almost impossible to not own it in some form. It was an incredibly common game, it came in all sorts of different console bundles and game packs, and every store that sold second-hand games seemed to have a shelf or two packed solely with Streets of Rage. So yes, I owned it, I liked it, I played it to death. But I never owned or even really played either of the sequels. I was certainly aware of them, and I knew that Streets of Rage 2 in particular was one of the most highly rated games on the Mega Drive. But at the time, I just wasn't a huge fan of the genre, or at least not as much as I was a fan of one-on-one fighting games like Street Fighter 2, and perhaps unfairly, I always considered beat-em-ups like Streets of Rage to be a substandard, almost bastardized alternative. But now, with the imminent arrival of the long-awaited sequel, I figured it'd be a good time to go back and have a look at the series as it currently stands. The first game starts with a text crawl accompanied by a truly iconic piece of music. It would be a stretch to call any game of this era cinematic, but to me at the time, this seemed as good as the opening of any Hollywood blockbuster, largely thanks to that soulful, evocative theme. Then the beat kicks in and we're introduced to our three protagonists, Adam, Blaze and Axel. And this title screen too is pretty damn iconic. And by the way, take note of that name there at the bottom, Yuzo Koshiro. It's rare for a game to give so much prominence to a composer, but there's a very good reason Streets of Rage did so. The man is a legend of video game soundtracks, and this series is possibly the pinnacle of his career. Anyway, you pick your character and the game starts. I've already used the word iconic twice, so I'm at risk of diminishing its meaning, so I won't use it again. But I will say that for me at least, the first moments of this first level are just the epitome of Sega. Mention the words Mega Drive to me and this will be the first thing that comes to my mind, even ahead of Sonic. There are two main reasons, the music and the colours. This first track is classic Koshiro. It's energetic, a little bit funky, a little bit techno. It's basically the perfect soundtrack for punching bad guys in the face. And as for the colours, check out the neon signs in the background. You might be familiar with the concept of a colour wheel and the notion that diametrically opposed colours create striking contrasts. These precise shades of purple and green and of red and blue are the perfect example of that, to my eye at least. And they recall to my mind another Sega game that used a similar scheme, the classic puzzle game Columns. To me these colours are early 90s gaming. The gameplay is basic beat-em-up stuff, and even for the time it wasn't super sophisticated. There's a jump button, an attack button, and a special attack button for when you really need everything on screen to die. But simple as it is, it works well and just feels really solid. And there is a bit more variety to it than there may first appear. When you land an attack, you can keep bashing away at the attack button to launch a multi-hit combo, or you can try to get near enough to an opponent to grab onto them and smash them in the face from truly close range, or alternatively smash their face into the ground with a throw or a suplex. You can also find weapons like baseball bats and iron pipes lying around that give you a bit of extra range, or in the case of the knife, the ability to slice open a jugular from afar. Of course, the bad guys aren't going to just stand around and take whatever punishment you throw out. They can punch back or grab you if you let them get close enough. Once you get the hang of it, there's quite a satisfying rhythm to it, and the game can actually become something like a dancing simulator as you weave in and out of punching range or duck in for a quick grapple. Rather reminds me of the one time I went to a nightclub actually. There are 3 playable characters, Axel, Blaze and Adam. They do play slightly differently, but again the variation is not hugely sophisticated. Basically, Adam moves a little slower, Blaze doesn't quite hit as hard, and Axel can't jump as high. I guess that basketball film from the early 90s was right. There are a few other differences in the combos the characters perform, but there's not much to it. I'm going to be playing as Adam, partially because this is the only one of the 3 games where he's playable, but mainly because he has such an awesome name. It's a noble, majestic name that bespeaks intelligence, wisdom, and just all-round greatness. Truly, it is a name for the best of men. Ahem. The first level, and indeed most of the levels in this first game, consists of a straight walk to the left, pausing frequently to dispatch another wave of street toughs until you get to the boss. You can tell he's the boss because he's a good 3 feet taller than anyone else in the game, apart from the other bosses of course. I guess promotions in this street gang are based purely on height. Bosses also get their own music, and it's another banging Kashiro track. It's funky fresh, as I believe all the cool kids are saying. This first boss though isn't much of a challenge, which is fine, it's only level 1 after all. Level 2 has a more downbeat tone, with subdued, almost mournful background music and a dilapidated back alley graphical theme, and it works quite well to create a feeling of urban decay. But honestly, apart from the first level, I find the background art to be a bit bland and repetitive. It's not bad by any means, but coupled with the rather small, primitive sprites and the relatively low number of frames in the animation, you can tell that this is a game from the earlier part of the 16-bit era. In this level, I use the special attack for the first time. Hitting the A button summons one of your old cop buddies who launches a flaming ball of napalm in your general direction. Actually, he must have incredible aim because he always manages to just hit the bad guys, never you. No mean feat with napalm. The boss here is a damn sight more annoying than the first. I haven't figured out a decent strategy, so I get sliced to pieces. The knife helps a bit, as does the fact that you get an extra special attack when you die. Then it's on to the beach, which is very beachy, I guess. But it's not actually very interesting. The third boss is much easier than the last. He instantly smashes me in the face because I'm terrible, but after that he insists on attacking my foot with his head, which proves to be a rather unsound tactic. The fourth stage is set on a bridge, I think, and it's also kind of bland, although it does offer a nice view of the city in the distance. The only addition to the gameplay here is the threat of falling into a pit, which I managed to avoid by some miracle. The boss is a dimensionally challenged person with breath so bad it literally sets itself on fire out of shame, or something. Again, I fail to come up with a decent strategy, so I die, of course. I do at least learn that trying to suplex this guy is a recipe for lower back pain. And seriously, I have sciatica. Lower back pain is the worst. Level 5. Okay, this is easily my favourite piece of music in the game. It's insanely catchy, and given how many times I played through this game as a kid, it eventually took up permanent residence in my brain, where it resides to this day. The boss here breaks tradition by not being 9 feet tall, although there are 2 of him, plus he's a girl. How outlandish. These two actually have the same sprite as the playable character Blaze, albeit recoloured. All up, there really isn't a huge amount of character sprites in this game, so recycling was probably a necessity. This becomes even more apparent on the next level. The fat guy with the bad breath makes a non-boss appearance, and the actual boss is 2 of the annoying claw guys from the second level. Awesome. At least this level has crushes to liven things up, although they're kind of annoying too. Level 7 switches things up by taking things vertical. Well, nothing much really changes, although it is nice to have the option to throw enemies off the side of the elevator, if you can manage it. Of course, they're more than happy to return the favour. And it gives your cop buddy a chance to demonstrate his incredible skill with that napalm launcher. Even with a giant building in the way and a literally impossible trajectory to contend with, he gets that napalm where it needs to go. There isn't even a boss here, unless you count crippling acrophobia. The next and final level has plenty of bosses though. In fact, it has all of them. All the bosses you've faced so far come back to have another go at brutally murdering you. Actually, now I think of it, they all have different coloured outfits this time around, so maybe they're different people. That would be incredible. I thought this crime gang was lucky to recruit a pair of karate-kicking, short-skirt-wearing babes, but it turns out they're quadruplets. What are the odds? Of course, if we're going down that rabbit hole, it has to be acknowledged that I've been kicking the snot out of identical thugs for the last 8 levels now. Probably best to just not think about it. And now I'm at the final boss. You're given the opportunity to join him as his right-hand man, and if I had a friend, this is where I could betray them and instigate a fight to the death. It's probably for the best I don't have friends, because I would definitely do that. The big bad guy has a gun, but I think it's just shooting Nerf bullets or something because I can punch them out of the air, and that doesn't work with real bullets, as I found out when I shot that Kung Fu master. He shouldn't have been bragging so much about his fists of steel, that's all I'll say. Turns out they were flesh and blood after all. So much blood. Anyway, the final boss dies before long, and we're treated to the end sequence. I used to love this sort of thing. Look at that artwork. It's like the sort of thing you'd see in a museum if the Mona Lisa consisted of a few hundred pixels in 64 colours. And so the game ends. Now, a brief interlude. Most gamers have probably at least heard of the Bit Wars, even if they weren't unfortunate enough to live through this horrible period of brutal, bloody conflict. This was the time when people suddenly cared massively about how many bits a console had, even though no one really knew what exactly a bit was. The more bits the better, that was all we cared about. And it was clear that the 16-bit Mega Drive was better than the 8-bit Master System, and the 32-bit Saturn was better than both of them. And the 64-bit Atari Jaguar was twice as good again. Or not. Nintendo, of course, had their own hierarchy going on, culminating in the Nintendo 64, which was essentially the last time anyone really cared about bits, at least from a marketing perspective. But there was another war going on, the Megabit War. Or you might call it the Bit Civil War, because this was a war between games on the same console. You see, not all game cartridges were created equal. Some had significantly higher memory capacity than others. The first Streets of Rage was a 4 megabit cartridge. That's half a megabyte, or roughly one small JPEG. Many early Mega Drive games were similarly tiny, Sonic the Hedgehog for instance. But as technology improved and memory became cheaper, games became bigger. Streets of Rage 2, which was released only slightly more than a year after the first game, came on a 16 megabit cartridge, making it 4 times the size of the original. And it shows. There's just so much more everything in this game. There are 4 playable characters now, with larger sprites, more frames of animation and more abilities. There are more enemies, more bosses, and although there are still only 8 levels, there's a hell of a lot more variety within them. The background and environments are much more detailed and interesting. The opening is more cinematic, the text crawl is still there, the music is maybe even better, and now there's a sinister figure looming over the city. The story is the same old nonsense. Adam's been kidnapped, explaining his absence from this game, but he's been replaced by his younger brother Skate and some burly beefcake called Max. These new characters represent opposing video game archetypes. Skate is fast and even has a unique dash ability, while Max hits like a truck and also moves like a truck, one that's run out of petrol and is being pulled by a geriatric yak. I'll be sticking with Axel for this playthrough though, as he's one of the original trio. This first level is in some ways a remix of the first level from the last game, but it almost immediately sets itself apart by letting you move into the foreground, something that the strictly linear original never did. Then you come to a mini-boss who emerges menacingly from the shadows, and once you kill him you move to a completely different environment indoors. This game really does pack in much more variety into a small space than the first in the series. This means that there's also a lot more variety in the music, and once again it's high quality stuff. There's a bit more jazz to the compositions here, and it works extremely well for creating a moody atmosphere as you clobber your way through the seedy underbelly of the city once again. Many people consider this to be one of the greatest soundtracks the Mega Drive has to offer, but for my money, and I swear I'm not being contrary just for the sake of it, the best music in the Streets of Rage series is yet to come. But we'll get to that in due course. Meanwhile, the bartender here turns out to be a bad guy and also the level's boss, so I'm duty bound to beat the crap out of him. At least I assume he was a bad guy and not just understandably upset by the wanton destruction taking place in his bar, because otherwise Axel starts to look like a bit of a thug himself. Possibly the biggest change to the gameplay in this sequel is the addition of special moves. Your cop buddy with the screen clearing napalm attack has taken early retirement, and now the A button unleashes a powerful attack that's unique to each character. Actually, each character has two variations, one for when you're moving and one for when you're stationary. These special moves are not free, however. They'll cost you a small amount of health. Whether that's a viable proposition depends on the situation, and it adds a bit more of a risk-reward element to the gameplay, which is a good thing. Each character also has another attack activated by tapping forward twice and then the B button. These are even more useful in my opinion, as they don't cost health and they tend to be easier to land. The second boss is... okay, I hate this guy and all his jetpack wearing ilk. He's almost never on the ground, which makes him tough to hit with regular attacks, and he moves around so much he's usually tough to hit at all. You need to watch his shadow in order to line up your attacks, but even then he's hard to pin down. Fights against this guy tend to devolve into tedious battles of attrition as you wander around the screen trying to land a jump kick and bring him down to earth, very briefly. The next level has an amusement park theme and is another good example of the sheer amount of variety packed into this game, especially compared to the original. There's an arcade, a pirate ship, and a Giga-esque sci-fi setting straight out of Alien. I'm pretty sure this isn't actually part of the theme park, it's a real alien spacecraft that crashed into the haunted house without anyone noticing. Then it's on to the baseball stadium with an elevator to a literally underground fighting ring at its centre, right at the pitcher's mound, which is famously the best and most secure location to have a secret hidden entrance to illegal shenanigans. The wrestler from the first game makes a reappearance and is a little more difficult to take down in this game, as he now has a counter attack if you get too aggressive. Still not super tough though. The adventure continues, on a boat, on a beach, and on the receiving end of a boxer's glove. Eventually you come to a pair of kickboxing twins, one named Condor and the other named Pheasant. I can just imagine the conversation that took place when they were coming up with their street names. How come you get to be Condor and I have to be Pheasant? What's wrong with Pheasant? The pheasant is a magnificent creature, just think of its beautiful plumage. We're murderous martial artists trained from birth to be unstoppable killing machines. I don't think beautiful plumage is what we want to be associated with. Well, I am the mighty Condor, and I have decreed it to be so. You shall be Pheasant. God damn it. Not that it really matters. Axel is more than a match for them. The boss of this stage is... there's two of them. One annoying core guy and one really annoying jetpack guy. This fight really drags on, as for some inexplicable reason the bosses don't seem super keen to receive a fist to the face. Honestly, some people just have no gratitude. The rest of the game is pretty much just a replay of the later sections of the original, albeit with all the extra bells and whistles that a 16 megabit cartridge allows for. There's a factory with conveyor belts and crushing machines, just like the original, an elevator ride like the original, and a rematch with most of the bosses you've fought so far, also just like the original. Even the final boss's lair is quite similar to that in the last game, although now he has a rather tough minion by his side. And hey, it's the music from that particularly tough level in the Sunlust Megawad for Doom that I looked at a while back. Go check it out, like and subscribe, hint hint. The end boss himself is a damn sight easier than his minion. He still doesn't seem to be particularly proficient with firearms, and he's susceptible to being stun-locked into oblivion. So with a minimum of fuss, the game is beaten. Adam is rescued from the bad guy's sex dungeon, and that's Streets of Rage 2. It's safe to say that in almost every way that matters, it's a big step up from the original. Apart from there being just more of everything, it's faster, it feels more responsive, and it's simply more fun to play. But now comes Streets of Rage 3, the most divisive game in the series. Most people seem to consider it a step back down, but not necessarily a huge one, and a substantial minority consider it to be the best in the series. What will I make of it? Find out next time on the Doddering Old Man Show. By which I mean right now. So, the first Streets of Rage was a 4 megabit game. Streets of Rage 2 was 16 megabits. Streets of Rage 3 was a whopping 24 megabits. That's not a fourfold increase like the second game was over the original, but it's still substantial. Not many games broke the 16 megabit barrier, even late in the Mega Drive's life. Street Fighter 2 was the first to do so, but even after that, 24 megabit games were relatively rare. Does Streets of Rage 3 make good use of the memory? Well, in some ways yes, in some ways no. The visuals are not markedly improved over the second game, and in fact I'd argue that on the whole they look a little worse, though that's mainly to do with the design rather than any technical limitations. But then there's the music. It's possibly even more divisive than the game itself, and plenty of people genuinely dislike it. But I think even those people would find it tough to argue against it being amongst the most technically impressive music on the Mega Drive. Personally, I absolutely love it. It is my jam, to put it most succinctly. I tend to appreciate music that takes risks and experiments, even if those risks don't always pay off, and Yuzo Koshiro and collaborator Motohiro Kawashima have let loose with some real experimentation here, at least as far as video game soundtracks go. Apparently Koshiro even made use of a type of musical randomizer for this soundtrack, and certain tracks definitely sound pretty random and not often to any good effect. But other tracks have a richness of sound that I honestly didn't know the Mega Drive was capable of, and I personally think it's been put to great use, for the most part. Anyway, Streets of Rage 3 features 4 playable characters, just like the last game. The burly, slow-moving wrestler Max is out, however, replaced by a burly, slow-moving old man called Zan. I thought we might finally be getting some representation of doddering old men in video games, but Zan doesn't dodder, and in fact is not exactly a man, more a cyborg. Axel, Blaze and Skate return, and retain their basic attributes and skill set. And there are actually a couple of hidden bonus characters as well. Once again, the game starts with a text crawl, something highly plausible to do with top-ranking city officials being replaced by robots. We also get cinematic character intros. Blaze looks pretty cute, but Axel looks a little goofy. I'll go with Blaze for this playthrough, as she's the only one of the original trio I haven't tried out yet. And that character select music, I love it. I understand that not everyone will though. Then there's a cutscene, one of the few significant additions since the last game. These pop up from time to time to awkwardly spout a bit of exposition that I can't imagine many people care about. Do we really need to know anything more about the fact that the big bad guy is back again and cruising for a bruising? I do appreciate the cinematic touch though. The gameplay is very similar to Streets of Rage 2, with one major addition that I really like. Each character can now perform a dash, both from side to side and into and out of the screen. This really helps give the characters a bit more agility, and coupled with the fact that attacks and movements seem slightly faster now, make this game the most frenetic of the three. It's also easily the most difficult. Easy mode is a not insubstantial challenge to a doddering old man, and normal mode is quite a substantial challenge indeed. I'm going to assume anything higher on the difficulty scale would be nigh on impossible for me. Like the second game, there's a good deal of variety in the environments, although they never seem quite as vibrant or as interesting as they did in Streets of Rage 2. This first level is a good example. You go from a warehouse to the docks to a back alley in quick succession, all of which look kind of bland. This back alley though does feature one of the best pieces of music from the soundtrack, and one of my all-time favourite Mega Drive tunes. Shame it only lasts for about 20 seconds before the boss jumps into the fray, bringing with him the boss theme. It'll be back later on though, in some form or other. This first boss is Shiva, i.e. the second to last boss from the previous game. He was tough there, but he's clearly been on holiday or something, because he's really lost his edge while he was sunbathing in the Bahamas or whatever, and he's been demoted to first level boss. He's also apparently unlockable as a player character, but I didn't get around to that. Or I forgot. Sorry. The next level features a fight with a scary clown, as if there's any other kind, and his pet kangaroo. If you kill the clown before his pet, the kangaroo hops away harmlessly. He might be back though. And then there's this scene in a disco featuring 3 sexy ladies dancing away with their 2 frames of animation. The music here is either catchy as hell or annoying as heck, depending on your perspective. As you might be able to guess, I'm in the former camp. These strobe lighting effects are pretty intense here. This predates photosensitivity warnings in games, but I'm guessing this would have really warranted one. Even I find it tough on the eyes after a while. The twin Kung Fu babes are back from the first game, and it turns out their names are Mona and Lisa, which I guess proves their parents have a sense of humour. They no longer share Blazer's sprite, which is handy. Things could have got confusing. Level 3 is a construction site, continuing the trend of gritty industrial environments that I don't much care for. There's certainly a lot more brown in this game compared to the last. There's also a bulldozer which threatens to run you over if you can't break through the walls in time. I fail to realise that you can actually attack it to temporarily hold its advance, and even when I do realise, I fail to find a rhythm to it. So I die, and I have to continue. But now the advantage of letting the kangaroo from earlier hop away becomes apparent. I can now select him as a playable character. And as a patriotic Australian, or at least as an Australian, I really can't pass up the opportunity. So now I'm Roo. The bulldozer goes bang, and I move on to the next section, which is yet another industrial elevator. The designers really love these things. There's something of a surprise waiting at the top. Your old pal Alex, except now he seems to want you dead. If you were paying attention to the bit at the start about robots replacing humans, you can probably figure out what's going on here. The next level takes you to an underground railway, complete with rolling stock that will take you out if you're not careful. They also take out enemies though, and on the whole they might be a net benefit to you. This section also features music that effectively demonstrates Kishiro's use of a randomizer for the music, and this piece is a little too experimental, even for my tolerance ears. The level culminates in a fight against 3 samurai who have unaccountably made their home at the end of the subterranean railway. Actually, it may be just the one samurai using ninja magic to create mirror images. That's a thing, right? I'm sure I've seen it in anime somewhere. In any case, this turns out to be a pretty epic fight, and one of the best in the series, as you dispatch the 3 different forms, each of them growing in power. And now it's time for another staple of Streets of Rage level progression, the battle towards the big bad guy's palatial penthouse. But it's only level 5. Maybe this game is just comparatively short despite the increased memory capacity. Unsurprisingly, this guy is a robot clone as well, and when you kill him, well, if you're playing on easy mode as I am, you get the bad ending, featuring more of that not entirely pleasant randomized music. You also get a less than subtle hint that maybe you should try the game on a higher difficulty setting if you want to see the rest of it. And to use a meme-tastic phrase, I ain't even mad. This is what difficulty settings should be. Pathetic losers like me should get our unchallenging easy modes, and people with actual skill should be rewarded for their efforts with a bit of extra content. Actually, in this case I'm missing out on quite a lot of content, so I guess I better give normal mode a go. What's the worst that could happen? I figure I'll give Zan a go this time around. He may not dotter, but he does provide a rare chance to play as an old man in a video game. Now I'm playing on normal mode, the next level is accessible. This one introduces a new twist to the gameplay formula. You've got a time limit, after which poison gas will be released, slowly killing you, and also the kidnapped police chief, who is imprisoned behind 2 force fields. You've got to find and destroy control panels to lower them, and if you don't manage to do it in time, the police chief dies. And I fail in this task. He's dead. Oh well. This isn't game over though. With his last breath, the chief tells you that his robot double is due to make a speech at City Hall. Apparently this would be a bad thing, so you set off to stop it. But, yep, I suck at this game, and Zan is kind of tough to use, so I die. Repeatedly. Until I've used up all of my continues. Sigh. Okay, let's finish this off with Axel, the ostensible star of the series. Now I know what I'm doing, I managed to save the chief, which actually leads to a different stage 7 than if you'd let him die, which is pretty cool. And the music in this stage, it's my favourite piece in the game, and one of my all-time favourites on the Mega Drive. This is what I meant when I mentioned richness of sound, and even if you don't like the music, which I can understand, I think you'd have to admit the quality of the synth in this track is pretty remarkable, given the limitations of the hardware. I recommend giving the whole soundtrack a listen on its own merits, without any sound effects in the way. It's easy enough to find on YouTube. The final zone is the robot factory, culminating in an impressive battle with Mr. X, or at least a robot being controlled by his brain, which currently resides in a jar. There's a time limit of sorts here too, and if you don't defeat the robot before it expires, a bunch of bombs go off, killing a lot of people. I can't quite bring myself to care. I nearly managed it anyway, but the damn robot just will not stay still. I kill it, but a few seconds too late, so I get another bad ending. Oh well, sucks to be me. But not as much as it sucks to be one of the thousands of fictional people who were killed in the bomb blasts, I guess. And phew. Okay, that's all 3 games in the Streets of Rage series done and dusted. And how have they held up? Well, they're undeniably classics of the beat-em-up genre. The first game is definitely looking a bit dated these days, and it was essentially superseded by its sequel only a year and a bit after it came out. But thanks to the fact it was the one I played the most, it still has the most nostalgia value for me. And I'd say it's still worth playing for people who want to get the full Streets of Rage experience. If you just want to get a taste of what the series is all about before the new game hits in a few days though, you're probably best off playing Streets of Rage 2. It has better and more interesting visual design than the third game, and is less frustrating and just a more pleasant game to play. But Streets of Rage 3 is far from a bad game, and also worth your time if you've got the motivation for it, and you may find the soundtrack to be a hidden gem, or you may completely hate it. Either response is valid. And as for the series as a whole, yeah, there's a reason these games are so well remembered, and why a lot of people are excited by the prospect of Streets of Rage 4. They're quite simple in gameplay and execution, but there's a kinetic satisfaction in beating 7 shades of hell out of a horde of pixelated thugs. It's worth mentioning too that these games function even better as multiplayer experiences, and I regret not being able to revisit that side of things now. But I have fond memories of playing with my friends as a kid, even though I inevitably found myself accidentally but not really punching them as much as I punched the actual bad guys. And the upcoming game's 4-player co-op must be one of its biggest selling points. Now that I've got a taste for beat-em-up action once again, I'll definitely be looking out for it when it goes on sale. Well, thanks for watching. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but YouTube introduced a new feature the other day, where you can hit the thumbs up button to indicate you like a video. And there's also this weird subscribe button. I have no idea what that does, so maybe you could click on it and let me know what happens. I don't think these things will catch on. For now though, get off my lawn.